Imagine sitting in the cockpit of one of World War II's most infamous planes, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. Your uniform is crisp, your eyes wide with hope. You've finished training, received your assignment, and ahead lies a career as a military pilot. The smell of fuel fills your nose, the engine rumbles beneath you. The runway stretches out like a door to the future. But there's one brutal truth no one tells you. Your chances of coming home alive are only 50%. Every second Luftwaffe pilot who climbed into a Messerschmitt never saw the war's end. This isn't an exaggeration, it's a stark statistic hiding thousands of young lives snuffed out too soon. Why did this happen? How could a plane designed to symbolize German might become a death trap for so many? What turned every flight in the Messerschmitt into a deadly gamble? Today we'll explore the dark side of this legendary fighter. We'll see how German pilot training faltered, how the Allies gained the upper hand with superior tactics and technology, and why, by the war's end, a new recruit's chances of survival were worse than those of an infantryman on the front line. This is more than a story about a plane. It's a story about the cost of war, about the human lives hidden behind gleaming metal. It's the story of why half the pilots who flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109 never returned home. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, a name that still stirs both admiration and dread among historians. On one hand, it was a marvel of 1930s German engineering. Light, fast, heavily armed, one of the first fighters in the world with retractable landing gear, a closed cockpit, and an all-metal frame. On the other hand, it claimed more German pilots than any other plane. Germany produced over 33,000 of these fighters during the war. From 1937 until the conflict's end, it was the Luftwaffe's backbone. It fought over Poland, France, Britain, the Eastern Front, Africa, and above Germany itself. Legends like Adolf Galland and Erich Hartmann soared in its cockpit, but thousands of new recruits, inexperienced and untested, flew it too. Many never returned. At the war's start, the Bf 109 seemed almost invincible. It outpaced and outclimbed most opponents. But war is a race, and by 1942, the Allies began catching up. By 1943 up at 44, they surpassed Germany in both aircraft and pilot quality. German casualties skyrocketed. The plane once built for blitzkrieg had become a tool of grueling defense. And suddenly, human skill mattered more than machinery. Training, or the lack of it, became the difference between life and death. In 1939, a young German pilot had 270 hours of flight time. By 1944, it was barely 130, sometimes less than 100. These inexperienced pilots climbed into a fast, unforgiving aircraft and faced veteran Allied pilots with 400,500 hours of combat experience. The Bf 109 itself was not a bad plane. It evolved over the years, receiving new engines and heavier armament, but its basic aerodynamic design remained the same, and handling it became increasingly difficult. Takeoff and landing on its narrow landing gear were hazardous even for experienced pilots. Young flyers often crashed before ever reaching the front lines. By 1944-45, every second pilot who climbed into a Bf 109 was dead within the first month of combat. There was no magic, no curse. Just numbers, fuel shortages, airfield bombings, overworked instructors, little time for proper training, and a relentless flow of Allied bombers and escort fighters. The Luftwaffe could no longer afford to train every pilot thoroughly. On screen, a chart showing flight hours of German pilots in 1939 versus 1944, footage of Allied Mustang P-51 and Spitfire Mk9 squadrons. As training quality fell, mortality rose. Shooting down a bomber in a tight formation, protected by dozens of Mustangs, became nearly impossible, meaning pilots flew straight into crossfire. Those who survived their first sortie might be shot down a week later. It was a deadly roulette, with each flight a new bet. Even the aces were not immortal. Those who survived amassed horrifying combat experience, but they were few. The vast majority were young men, 18, 22 years old, sent into the sky because their commanders ordered them to. For them, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 was not a legend. It was the last place on Earth. On screen, black and white photos of smiling cadets next to a Bf 109, followed by archival footage of air combat and a plane going down. These numbers, 50% killed, are not just statistics. They are thousands of stories that repeat themselves. Brief training, first mission, meeting a swarm of enemies, death or capture. This is the dark side of the Luftwaffe's legend. Understanding why half the Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilots didn't return. To understand why every second Bf 109 pilot didn't come home, we need to look at how the war itself had changed by 1943-44. Training. From elite to rush. At the war's start, the German pilot school was among the best in the world. Prospective pilots underwent a long training program, accumulated substantial flight hours, and studied tactics. Experienced instructors had the time to focus on each cadet. Pilots reached the front lines confident and skilled. But as the war dragged on, everything changed. The Allies increased aircraft production, while Germany lost pilots. By 1943, and especially 1944, the Luftwaffe faced a catastrophic manpower shortage. Training time was cut to a minimum. Where a cadet once spent 200-250 hours in the air, by the end of the war it might be only 100, 120, sometimes less. These numbers mean one thing. A young German pilot climbed into the cockpit of a high-speed, demanding Bf 109 with barely enough skill to control it. And he immediately faced Allied aces with 400 ton of 500 hours of combat experience. Like a driving school graduate racing against a professional driver. Tactics, from hunters to prey. The Bf 109 was designed for blitzkrieg, fast strikes and support for advancing ground troops. In Poland and France, it operated from a position of strength, hunting outdated enemy aircraft. But from the Battle of Britain onward, especially after 1943, the Luftwaffe's role changed. German pilots were forced to intercept tight formations of American and British bombers, protected by hundreds of escort fighters. Attacking B-17s and Lancasters meant flying straight into crossfire. And after hitting the bombers, they still had to contend with Mustang P-51s, Spitfires and Tempests. Every sortie became a fight for survival. Even though the Messerschmitt was fast, it no longer held the advantage. Any mistake, any hesitation, and a pilot was under fire. The plane, a fighter with character. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was exceptional for its time, but required precision. Its narrow landing gear made takeoffs and landings tricky, especially on damaged airfields. Young pilots often lost their planes before even reaching combat. By 1944, even the upgraded Bf 109 variants were outclassed in range, operational radius, and sometimes firepower by the newest Allied aircraft. The Germans tried to compensate with skill, but when skill was lacking, the plane could not save them. By 1944-45, Germany faced a chronic shortage of aviation fuel. Training flights were cut back, combat missions became shorter, and young pilots didn't gain the experience they needed. Even the aces complained that their flight hours were insufficient. It was a downward spiral. Less fuel meant less training, which meant higher losses, which meant fewer experienced pilots to train the newcomers. Systemic collapse. All these factors converged into a single catastrophe. The Luftwaffe, once a formidable force, by 1944 had become an army with aircraft demanding skill, but without skilled pilots. Every second Messerschmitt pilot didn't die because the plane was bad. They died because the system that was supposed to make it a lethal weapon had collapsed. On screen, a chart showing declining German flight hours and the growing number of Allied aircraft, archival footage of airfield bombings. And that's just the dry side of the story. Behind every number lies a personal tragedy. Young men who believed they were flying to defend their homeland found themselves trapped in a deadly machine created by the war. Individual stories. When we say every second pilot died, it sounds like a cold statistic. But behind those numbers are real faces, real fates. Let's look at a few typical stories of Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilots. Hans, 19, Eastern Front. In 1944, Hans had just completed an accelerated training course, only 115 hours of flight, half on training aircraft. He was issued a uniform, moved into a Bf 109G, and within days found himself at an airfield near Minsk. His first combat mission was to intercept Soviet ground attack aircraft. Hans had never seen real combat. He tried to stay with his wingman, but the group came under attack by Yak-9s. His Messerschmitt was shot down in 3 minutes. Hans bailed out, landed behind enemy lines, and was captured. He spent the rest of the war in a prison camp. To statistics, it was just another lost aircraft. To him, it was the end of his career, the destruction of his life. Friedrich 21, Western Front. Friedrich joined a Jagdgeschwader, intercepting American bombers over Germany. In January 1945, he took off to intercept a formation of B-17s. The formation was guarded by dozens of Mustang P-51s. Friedrich managed to open fire, but his plane was immediately attacked by 3 Mustangs. His aircraft caught fire. He ejected, but died upon landing when his parachute got caught on debris. It was his 3rd sortie. He hadn't shot down a single enemy. Aces and rookies. Yes, there were aces, Hartmann, Galland, but they became legends precisely because they were few. They survived thanks to experience, skill, and luck. Rookies went up one after another and died. By 1944, the average lifespan of a German fighter at the front was measured not in years, but in weeks. On screen, statistics comparing rookie flight hours versus Allied pilots. Average combat lifespan. Daily life and psychological pressure. German pilots lived under constant threat. Allied bombers targeted their airfields, fuel was scarce, nights were spent on duty, days on sorties. Stress, fatigue, poor nutrition, lack of rest. All these factors lowered survival chances. This war turned the Messerschmitt Bf 109 into a machine almost impossible to survive in, unless you were an ace. On screen, footage of tired pilots, takeoffs under fire, bombs falling on airfields. The cost of war. Every second Messerschmitt pilot who died, this is not a slogan. It is the consequence of waging total war, where human life became expendable. Looking at photos of these smiling cadets beside their planes, it becomes clear. Behind the propaganda posters lay a deadly reality. These young men had no idea that their chances of surviving the war were lower than those of a soldier in the trenches. The Bf 109 remains in history as a symbol of German WO's aviation. For some, a technical masterpiece, for others, a fearsome opponent. But behind that image lies real tragedy. Every second pilot who climbed into its cockpit never returned home. These are not just numbers. They are the lives of young men caught in the gears of total war. A plane intended as a blitzkrieg weapon became a tool of desperate defense, and those who flew it became expendable. We often focus on the machines and forget the people, but behind every plane, every takeoff, every air battle, there were real faces. Boys just like today's students. They believed in the future, dreamed of life after the war. For half of them, that life never came. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 became not only a symbol of the German fighter, but a monument to the senseless cost of war. 50%, a reminder of how quickly technology, how quickly any idea, can turn into a trap for those who use it. Decades later, it's important not only to study technical specifications, but to remember the human side. Behind every aircraft are lives. Behind every legend, a dark truth. This was the story of why every second Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilot never returned home. The story of the people that war turned into expendable material. A story that must be remembered, so it never happens again.